Hi everyone and welcome. I am joined today by Professor Džefri Saks to discuss what is happening in Europe. As only 15 years ago, it was common to argue that, not by many, but by few, that this century would belong to the Europeans. And now, of course, we're seeing economic decline, social problems, political instability, very dangerous war enthusiasm. There's a complicity to genocide, fueling the Ukraine war in this moralistic hysteria, military Keynesianism, very terrifying language coming out of the governments. And as our common friend Yanis Varoufakis said, it's becoming the stupid continent. So it does seem as if a lot of this, but not everything, intensified with the Ukraine war. How do you see? How do you interpret this massive shift? Because the EU was supposed to be a peace project, and well, this doesn't feel like peace.
It is a bit of a mystery, I have to say. And I've heard many theories. I've entertained many theories about why Europe is so underperforming. But I have to say, it is still, to some extent, inexplicable to me. Europe, by many standards, has the highest quality of life in the world, longest life expectancy, extremely low poverty rates, high social protection, much leisure time, sophisticated economies and workforce. So, as you said, looking 25 years ago, it looked like Europe had the right model, and it had the capacity to not only continue with that model, but to share it with the rest of the world. I thought Europe would lead diplomatically in promoting the vision of quality of life and a good social basis, low inequalities, high living standards to other parts of the world. But today, Europe is dysfunctional. It's politically dysfunctional. It's organizationally dysfunctional. The economy is, as you said, sputtering because of the self-imposed costs that Europe has put on itself during this Ukraine war. Well, why is this? On the one side, I think it's right to argue the leadership across Europe is generally rather miserable. That's not my assessment. That's the assessment of the electorates. There's hardly a popular figure anywhere in Europe. Typically, European leaders have approval ratings of maybe 25%, disapproval ratings well over 50%. Some parts don't know or don't care, but basically, these are leaders that do not have approval of the populations. It's generally the case that the more that they have been warmongering, the less approval they have. So leaders like Macron and Starmer, who have been in the forefront of the Ukraine war, are the least popular of all. The populations are saying, we want peace. We want diplomacy. We don't want the wars. We don't want these sanctions regimes which just boomerang on us. But the leaders persist. Not only do they persist obsessively. I think the main job of a European leader these days is to meet with Zelensky. Meet with Zelensky in the morning, meet with Zelensky in the afternoon, fly someplace to meet with Zelensky in the evening, fly to another city, meet with Zelensky again. It seems they don't have day jobs. This is their almost sole activity. Where does this come from? It is, I think, Glenn, not glibly explicable, not easily explicable. Some people say, well, it's the big business of war, and most of the countries have war industries that are fueling this. Maybe. I think there's something to this. I think one of the things that is true is that much of European politics is really deep state intelligence agency politics. This has been true in the United States. The CIA ran foreign policy in the United States for a very long time, or at least one could say it was the repository of the sustained foreign policy for a very long time. It created the long-term projects. And we know the CIA, MI6, BND, DGSE in France and so forth work very closely together. We had a report today that the head of the French spy agency told the head of Telegram to block accounts of opposition voices in Romania, for example. We know that there is a lot of security agency work. The security agencies have basically been in a war against Russia for decades. This has been their project. That continues, and it seems that many of these so-called political leaders are not leaders at all. They're kind of factotums of the security state apparatus. So I have to confess, I don't have an absolute clear view. And I'll tell you one thing that's interesting from this perspective in my mind. When Tucker Carlson had his interview with President Putin that was so widely watched, and he asked President Putin, why is the German government behaving the way that it is? It was the one time that Putin said, I don't really understand why. I don't get it. He also couldn't come up with an explanation. But I would say, just to put a bottom line on this, European leadership has been miserable, unpopular, a failure from a strategic point of view. It continues to be so until today. Maybe I'll add one more point on this, which is that Europe is structurally hamstrung as well. Clearly, the European project is a jerry-rigged operation where Europe is essentially still 27 sovereign countries, and to the extent that it is one union, it's a not very representative union. It doesn't have institutions that garner much confidence. It doesn't have leaders of the European Commission that command much respect or that deserve much respect from my point of view in most part. So all of this is to say Europe is lost right now. The warmongering is self-destructive and dangerous. It's obsessive. It's a failure. Exactly why is a little bit hard to say. Well, yes, the main thing that both the US deep state and the European deep state rejected or forgot or blindly refuses to see is that there is an alternative to the NATO being in Ukraine or Russia dominating Ukraine. It's called neutrality. It's called a buffer state. And this arrangement goes back several thousand years. It's throughout human history that when there are major empires or major powers that are in competition with each other, you leave some territory in between that doesn't suffer as a result of that. It just prevents the two sides from clashing in nose to nose. And there's nothing ignominious about neutrality. It's a very smart policy, and it worked extremely well for Sweden and Finland and for Ukraine, while Ukraine was allowed to be neutral, for Austria, for Switzerland. These are not the desperate places in the world. They're the most prosperous places in the world. When you think about the World Happiness Rankings, which I happen to edit, co-edit every year with colleagues, Finland's number one. And yet the Finnish president, Stubb, laughingly said, I have to warn the Ukrainians not to become like Finland. Are you kidding? Finland had phenomenal success as a neutral state. Then, of course, the U.S. security apparatus promoted politicians like Stube with an American backing who would defend the American-led hegemony and so forth. That was also part of the U.S. game. How do we control politics in every country? But what are the Europeans thinking? Why can't one leader just clearly stand up and say, you know, it would be smarter if Ukraine were neutral? Not Russian, not NATO, just neutral. Not the worst thing in the world, but the best for everybody, because that would keep the wars away from us. Now Europe is in a tizzy. Oh my God, if we don't succeed in Ukraine, Russia's going to be in Paris again. You know, as if this is 1812 and 1815, the Napoleonic Wars, which, by the way, Europe invaded Russia, not the other way around. We should continue to recall. So there's a lot of blindness, a lot of lack of the most basic recognition of reality, the most basic understanding of how we got to this disaster, from the peacemaking of Gorbachev and Yeltsin to outright war, was a U.S. deep state provocation supported by the security apparatus across Europe. Well, Trump has figured this out. Interestingly, and dangerously, he doesn't have full voice in the United States, because the U.S. deep state, many neocons, many hardliners continue in the U.S. to try to push for war and run over to Europe and say, let's pull Trump back to good sense to continue the war against Russia. And that's part of the drama right now. Part of the European delusion is we can win back the United States for continued warmongering. Maybe there are parts of the U.S. security apparatus that are working hand in hand with the Europeans. We know that part of Trump's own team, General Kellogg, Mike Waltz, other hardliners are saying to the Europeans, yes, let's get our terms. The president will come along and so forth. So making peace is not easy when you've had this 30-year project of expanding hegemony, Western hegemony, mainly U.S. hegemony. Trump's trying to stop it. It could be stopped, but we're still waiting for a single, sensible European voice of a major power to tell the truth. There are many in the smaller countries, Viktor Orban or Robert Fico, who are telling the truth. There are candidates in Eastern Europe who are telling the truth, or then cut out of election campaigns and told that they can't stand. But we're waiting for a leader in Germany or France or Britain to tell the truth. Britain will be the last, I think. It always is in this regard. It's the most warmongering of all. Maybe some other European leader will begin to tell the truth. As far as I know, not one European leader of the major countries or the European Commission is in any kind of diplomacy with Russia. Now, occasionally they beg the United States, oh, please let us be at the table. It's not fair. We're not at the table. This is pathetic, to say the least. If Europe wants to negotiate with Russia, pick up a phone, dial a Zoom, fly to Moscow, invite Foreign Minister Lavrov to a meeting someplace. For heaven's sake, don't beg the United States. Open diplomacy. So, yes.